Welcome to the Phoenix Suns Solar Panel podcast here. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Really excited for today's episode. My name is Tim Tompkins, of course, and as always, Mr. Greg Esposito, the defender. We'll explain that later.
Hello, Your Honor. Ahoy, hoy.
And of course, Mr. Dave King, to nobody's surprise, the prosecutor.
How's it going? I'm all ready to prosecute this bad boy.
So we are starting we're really excited about. We've been talking about doing this for a couple of months. We are starting our 3-part series on the trial of Ryan McDonough. I will be the judge. Greg will be the defender. Dave will be the prosecutor. What's important here is everybody that's joining us live on YouTube is going to be the jury, where after each segment, you guys can ask follow-up questions of either the prosecutor or the defender. So super excited. We're going to get into that. But first, kind of want to start off with a couple of NBA-related items. Adam Silver specifically talking to the NBA Players Association. A couple of remarks he had, highlights from the call I wanted to read and then get your guys' feedback on. Your thoughts on. Adam Silver saying to the players that there is no guarantee next season we'll have fans in the arenas. Certainly not at how full those arenas will be. He still believes that each round of this year's playoffs would be a 7-game series, but that they'd be able to finish it quicker than normal because essentially, and we'll get into this, all the players would be in 1 or 2 locations, so they're cutting out travel, etc. Orlando and Vegas are still the 2 most realistic sites that they would host the playoffs, although other cities have inquired about hosting as well. And I thought this was really interesting. Training camp before the season would restart, it's looking like 3 weeks, and that is actually the minimum amount of time that's being discussed.
I don't know. The thing about not having fans even starting next year is a little weird to me. I think it's more of a preparing people for the thought of it, not it's going to be an actuality. I really think that's more of what is going on here, and not really, and not really what's going to happen come the 2021 season. Especially, they're talking about pushing it back to December, right? So at the start of it, at least, to December. So I'm not quite sure why there would need to be no fans again. I'm a bit confused by why Adam Silver's saying that, outside of just preparing the players for the potential that 40% of the revenue, because that's what comes from fans coming in the arenas, buying tickets, buying concessions, those kind of things, that those may not be there. So I think it may be more of a scare tactic preparation kind of thing, and not actually what is going to happen in actuality come 2021.
Though, I think the actual scare tactic is the pandemic we're dealing with, not necessarily Adam Silver trying to use a scare tactic. There are people who think that we've got that this pandemic is overblown, that there aren't actually people dying from it, that there isn't actually things wrong with our country, and that it's a political push and all that. Well, none of that's. Look, this is killing people. There's a pandemic, and the closer you have a bunch of people breathing on each other, the bigger chance you get of sharing it. And so I can totally see why people would not be in the stands until there's a vaccine. Adam Silver is basically saying, look, we don't want 20,000 people in something the size of a football field, all fitting in something the size of the football field, for 2.5 hours or 3.5 hours, depending on how early you get there and how late the game goes. 82 times a year times 30 teams. So I can totally see why there won't be fans in the stands until there's a vaccine, and we know that we're not going to be just transmitting it to strangers every time we go to a game. So I think the fear tactic is the pandemic, not the commissioner.
Oh, I think that's fair. I certainly think that it should be a concern when just because of the pandemic in general. But I'm not quite sure. I don't know why you come out and say it right now. I think that call probably should have just focused on what are we doing right now to get the rest of this season.
Well, but I
going.
think people need to hear the big picture. I think it's important that somebody in this country actually has a big picture in mind, and Adam Silver is thinking about the future of the NBA. He's also warning players. Look, the other thing he said on that call with the players is that 40%, 40% of the league's revenue comes from fans in the stands. That's what he says. So basically, you know what he's doing? He's lobbing over a grenade saying, hey, look, man, that's 40% of your money too, because they split the revenues. So, which means that the salary cap's going to go down. So he's warning people. He's setting it up. It's not a fear tactic. It's a reality tactic saying, look, man, this is not going to disappear. We're not going to wake up one day and this is over and we're all back to the way it was. He's saying it's going to be a while until there's a vaccine. And then once there's a vaccine, then everybody has to actually take the vaccine. So he's just laying out the groundwork that this isn't just disappearing.
Yeah, and I think that is 100% fair to do that. I think it just caught people. I think it caught people off guard to hear that, and I think there's a lot of steps between now and December to determine how 2021 in the NBA is going to look, and even if 2021 in the NBA is going to happen. I mean, there's questions about that. We don't even know how or if or, for that matter, when. I mean, December is what we're hearing, but that doesn't mean that's necessarily when the season will start either. There are so many question marks about all of this, and we've yet to even scratch the surface on getting any answers when it comes to those.
He did sound pretty positive that it was going to start. I thought it was interesting too. One thing I didn't read before and the comments that he made, but they were talking about, look, it's unsustainable to go into the season and say, if one player tests positive, we're going to shut it down, because the likelihood of that happening is almost 100%. So if you go into the playoffs or you go into next season and a player tests positive, you can't pull a team out of a 7-game series, right? So he was talking about different ways that essentially they'd be testing every single day. They'd pull that one player out and they'd have to continue playing, and that would sort of be part of the contingency of all this. It's just a general understanding of it. I do.
Well, let me just throw that out there, though. So I totally agree. I think you've got to just keep playing. I get it. You don't put necessarily everyone who is around him in quarantine, because that is that shutdown. I get that, and you push through. They are very unlikely to have any serious side effects. This is the group of people in the situation that they're in, that they're very unlikely to have any huge medical problems. However, if you look at the Jazz. Let's pretend we were in this protocol in the early March. Rudy Gobert tests positive. They test the rest of the team. Donovan Mitchell tests positive as well. How's that bode for the Jazz's rest of the season? It doesn't bode well if you take those two out for 2 weeks.
But it's either that or you don't play.
Oh, sure. They'll keep playing. I'm just saying that it really affects the competitive balance when you've got guys out 2 weeks at a time. I mean, we were, obviously players get injured and they're out a couple weeks at a time, but this is a guarantee, and it's just frustrating because they would otherwise probably be feeling just fine while they're going through this.
Well, just imagine your team winds up in the finals day before game one. All of a sudden, your best player. Yeah. Let's say it's the Lakers, and we won't say LeBron, but let's say AD tests positive, right? He's out basically the finals. You don't think that people are going to start claiming there's an asterisk on the season because of that and all these things? Like,
well, did anyone do it when LeBron beat the Warriors when Klay Thompson and everybody else went down? I mean, is there an asterisk, or is that still?
Yeah, people talk about all that. I just think this
it's just stuff that happens.
This is going to be messy.
But this is just going to be one of those that's going to be yet another reason. But look, we've had 2 strike-shortened seasons in the last 20 years or so, or 25 years, 23 years. And people don't talk about the asterisks after those seasons. They're not going to talk about it ultimately after this one. They're just going to be bitching about it while it's happening. I can totally see, I'm totally for them trying this. Disney World seems like a very ideal place, actually. Although somebody just told me Disney World is starting to take reservations for trips. So I don't know how they're going to just shut down Disney World to host these guys.
They don't have to shut down Disney World to do it. I mean, Disney. I don't know if you guys have ever been, but it's essentially its own city inside of Orlando. So you have all those different areas that are outside of Disney where those giant hotels that the players could essentially just take over those parks, if you will. So it's not actually Disney that the players would be in. I mean, they wouldn't be like staying at the Magic Kingdom.
Yeah, it'd be the Wide World of Sports section, correct? That they'd be taking over and living in. So
right. I mean, they have like downtown Disney, which is completely
or the
separate
Lopez
of actual
brothers be
Disney.
bummed if they don't get all of Disney to themselves.
They're in the Bucks. They're on the Bucks. They'll make it happen. Those guys are just rubbing their hands, going, "This is amazing. Let's do this thing." Disney World. I get to go live there, quarantined. I'm in. That's actually better than the championship to the Lopez brothers. They think screw the Larry O'Brien trophy. I'm gonna go hang out with Goofy and Donald for a couple months. They're pumped. They're ready.
Before we get into this trial, I'm really excited, and I realized at the very beginning of this episode that we were having some audio issues. Thank you everybody so much in the YouTube chat for letting us know, because otherwise we would have no damn idea, because we sound great to each other, but we don't know how it's being broadcast.
Yeah, we weren't hearing that echo at all.
We're gonna go through and we're gonna re-explain kind of exactly what we're doing for the start of the trial of Ryan McDonough. But before we do that, Monty Williams had some comments that we were talking about in our group chat a couple of days ago, saying that he believed the Suns can compete with any team in the league if there is a playoff play-in tournament.
I don't disagree if everybody's healthy, and they've been given a chance to get Kelly Oubre healthy and Frank Kaminsky. So now you would get an opportunity to see a full roster with the Phoenix Suns that we haven't really seen all year. Rust is the biggest question mark, but they're not the only team that will be dealing with that. Everybody in the league will be dealing with that same thing. So I think actually, if you look at it, this would probably be the time that the Suns could compete with anybody, because everybody's starting from square one, basically, again. There's no denying that the Suns have talent on the roster. They proved that early in the season that they could beat really good teams when they're clicking. If they got on a hot streak, I certainly think they can beat anybody in the league. The problem is they were consistently inconsistent throughout the entire season due to injuries and other factors. So if they come in healthy and they get that chemistry back, I don't see why they couldn't make a run. Now, they're not going to beat the Lakers in a series, but if we're talking a bunch of play-in games where a battle for the 8th, 7th, and 8th seed, I certainly could see them make a run through that back half of the Western Conference or NBA, depending on how they set it up to get one of those spots.
Look, I am a huge fan of some kind of play-in tournament. Huge. Anything can happen. You can have some good games, and all of a sudden you're in. You can have a bad game, and you're out anyway, but you were already out, so it's not a big deal. Obviously, teams like the Suns would absolutely love a play-in tournament. Teams like the Grizzlies, who are currently in 8th place, would hate a play-in tournament. They would hate that idea. They just want to be given a playoff series. So what's going to happen, actually, in my mind, my asterisk is going to be on the Grizzlies making the 8th seed when nobody had a chance to fight for the seed at the very end of the season or not. If they just make a playoffs and suddenly the Grizzlies they had a three-game lead in that 8th seed, but I don't feel like they were the team best positioned to actually finish the season in the 8th seed. But we'll never know. So I think that's an asterisk.
They had made a couple of trades where they really lost some of their veterans. They also had one of the toughest schedules going down the stretch. But can you imagine if the Suns were in the 8th seed and then the NBA said, actually, we're going to have a playoff tournament? Like, as a fan base, I'd be pissed.
I know, we'd be melting if they were going to have a play-in tournament and Suns finally had the 8th seed. We'd be like, ah!
Don't worry.
Yeah, but no, I would love it. I'd love to see it. As a Suns fan, I'd love to see a play-in tournament. Plus, it's fun. It's fun to see teams on do-or-die games.
Don't worry, it's Memphis, aka the future Las Vegas franchise, so I don't think their fan base is going to be too riled up.
Boy, can there be anything more opposite, though, going from basically the NBA version of Memphis, not the ragtime or whatever they are, the musical team city, but the NBA version of Memphis is about as boring as it gets, and then you go to Vegas, which would be about as crazy as it gets. Man, that'd be fun.
Yeah. I think they certainly would enjoy that. The players, the league, everybody. I think outside of missing out on some good barbecue when you go to Memphis, I think everybody would be in favor of Memphis moving to Vegas.
All right, so before we get into this, I do want to take a moment to thank one of our listeners who is a supporter of the show and has been for a number of months now. So thank you so much, Eric Fleury, for supporting the show every single month. If you feel like you guys get a lot out of it and you're in a financially stable place to do so, we do have a $1, a $5, and a $10 option. It's in the show notes below, so feel free to do that. But Eric, thank you so much. We really appreciate you.
Before we start for our audio listening group, we are kind of dressed up today for this, and Tim looks like he's got a shift at Chippendales after this. Is what that outfit looks like. Yeah.
Should have gone shirtless, Tim.
Tim's the only one that could rock that. The jacket with no shirt and the bow tie on. You could have pulled that off. So.
Thank you. Okay, so what we're doing here is a 3-part series on the trial of Ryan McDonough. I am going to be the judge. Here's a result from YouTube. That was weird. Greg is going to be the Greg is going to be the defender, and Dave is going to be the prosecutor. So, like I said, this is a 3-part series. You guys watching on YouTube right now, we want to hear from you because after every single one of these sections, there's going to be a part for listener follow-up questions. And by listener, you're the jury with follow-up questions for either Dave or Greg based upon their statements. Okay, so again, this is a 3-part series. I'm going to go through some of the rules we have for this. There's no mention of specific transactions that McDonough made in this week's episode. That's going to be in separate ones. Dave or Greg can talk about the roster overall, perception, records, etc. Either side can object to the other one, and me, being the judge, will rule on whether the argument is allowed. So you, the jury, need to keep in mind whether or not that argument was allowed, or you have to take it off the table. Okay. Opening and closing arguments shouldn't go longer than 8 minutes. And I do have the right to cut it off. I guarantee you, Greg, if you start going 10 minutes straight without stopping to talk, I will cut you off. Why 8 minutes?
Because I thought 10 sounded too long. I don't know. My legal degree it didn't lay out all of the parameters.
I think that's in one of the books. Trial. It has to be 8 minutes.
Is it? Yeah. I spent 5 minutes in law school, so it was an online class. So I'm ready.
Right.
For this.
Well. This is a podcast / YouTube show. Don't talk for 8 minutes straight. And he can either
He's
side
made
can,
a career of that. What are you talking about?
Challenge accepted, Tim. Challenge accepted.
Can submit evidence for consideration. One thing is Jacob in the YouTube chat is saying, Greg, to raise your audio level a bit. By the way, in case you guys haven't noticed, normally Greg is on a headset mic, but he's been doing a lot of work on that headset mic, and it shorted out a couple of weeks ago, so that's part of the reason for the audio problems today. He's getting a new one, though. Don't worry. All right, so the first charge being brought against Ryan McDonough is that Ryan McDonough left the Suns worse off than when he showed up. We're going to go to opening statements, starting with Dave, the prosecutor.
All right, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, mostly gentlemen. Hopefully there's some ladies in there. We appreciate you coming today, and I want to make my opening statements here about Ryan McDonough as the general manager of the Phoenix Suns. Did he leave them worse off than when he showed up? Let's go all the way back to the spring of 2013. I remember the opening press conferences. Ryan McDonough, very smugly at the time, we thought very maturely, because he was so young, he was like the age of my kids, very maturely we thought at the time, but smugly in retrospect said, I've got to improve the talent on this roster. I have an opportunity to turn over most of the players. He inherited a team that had won 25 games in franchise history, and he needed to improve the team. But this is what he walked into a team that had playoffs in 29 seasons of their 29 of their 45 seasons, they had made the playoffs 29 times and had less than 20 wins only twice, including the seasons that he showed up. 28 wins coming out of the 2013 season, and they had 25 wins and 16 wins coming into the 68-69 season, that first inaugural season. I'm hearing some major feedback on my mic. So he got them. They had 28 or more wins in 43 of their 45 seasons. With him putting the roster together. My audio is choppy. God damn it. With McDonough putting the roster together 6 times. Stream is stuttering. Dave is choppy. Let's pull it together, guys.
Tim disappeared. I don't know what is going on right now. I think Ryan McDonough has hacked our stream and is attempting to.
I think he has, man.
Sure
He's ruining my argument.
Yeah, if you want to re-rack that bad boy, you can start it again. I won't be upset about that. We have no judge to make the call. I don't know where Tim disappeared to, but
I'm right here. What is it?
There you go. There's Tim's back. Start it over.
Did you leave again? Tim, you always leave during these things.
All right, Dave.
Why do you just get up and leave?
I have things to do. I had to pee.
All right.
Oh my God.
Dave, restart because we were having that audio issue, and now our judge can actually hear the argument. So go ahead.
I know the judge is supposed to be listening.
Yeah. I have your argument written down, man.
Dave, go.
Well, now I'm not even going to do as well because I got to do it a second time. I'm always better the first time.
Well, that's what she said.
That's what you said. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's go all the way back. Obviously, this will be a little unique because I don't do things scripted. Let's go all the way back to when Ryan McDonough took over this team. If you guys remember, they were coming off a 25-win season with Goran Dragic as their only real player on the team. At the time, is what we thought anyway. The only real player on the team. He came in smugly and said that he wanted to make the team better. He wanted to improve the talent on the team. He was just throwing the prior administration under the bus, of which one was Lon Babby, who was sitting right next to him in that press conference, saying that he was basically walked into a bare shelf and his job was to make the team competitive again. The reality, though, is a little bit different. The reality is that he inherited a team, a franchise, that had won 28 or more games in 43 of 45 seasons. 45 seasons. 28 or more wins in 43 of them. Playoffs in 29 of them. And the only seasons that were under 28 wins were the first season when they were an expansion team and the last season before he took over, which was his little ushering door into the franchise. What he said happened is he inherited a roster with no talent. What actually is true is that the roster he had coming into that offseason of 2013 had 7 future playoff starters on the roster already. 7 future playoff starters on the roster that he inherited. Goran Dragic, Channing Frye, PJ Tucker, Markieff Morris, Marcus Morris, and as well as Marcin Gortat and Jared Dudley. All on that roster, all would play in the playoffs in future seasons. None of them for the Suns, but they would play in the playoffs for future seasons. Those guys in the 6 off seasons in 5 years that Ryan McDonough ran the team, 7 of the guys he brought in the day he took over the roster played in the playoffs. None of them for the Suns. Guess how many guys he brought in made the playoffs? 0. The Suns had no playoff seasons during his run. They still don't have a playoff season. 1 full off season after his run. 2 seasons played after his run. No playoffs. He brought in no guys who could play in the playoffs for the team. So I think that is pretty stark evidence that he made the franchise worse while he was there. Also, you know what he left behind? So he started with a future All-Star in Goran Dragic. He started with the 5th overall pick. He started with 2 future first-round picks coming to him as extra booty that the prior regime had given him. They gave him the 2 future Steve Nash first-round picks. He started with the 5th overall pick, and he started with a future All-Star and 7 total future playoff starters. That's what he walked in with. What he left us with was no future first-round picks, 1 number 6 pick overall. He left the Suns. After he left, he gave us a roster, the 2018-19 roster, that had no future first-round picks no future first-round picks coming, and the 6th overall pick earned from how bad that roster was. And I could count 5 future playoff starters on the roster if you project wildly. I can predict Devin Booker, who did become an All-Star, so he did draft an All-Star, so good for him. He didn't keep the All-Star he had that he started with, but he drafted a new one, so 1 for 1 there. He left us with T.J. Warren, DeAndre Ayton, who might be an All-Star, Mikal Bridges. Those guys are future starters on playoff teams. T.J. Warren is going to be a future starter if the NBA season, going to be a starter in the playoffs if the NBA season continues this year. He'll be a starter for the Pacers. But he's not on the team anymore, but that's okay. Ryan McDonough left us with a future starter, playoff starter in T.J. Warren. DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges, I totally see starting future playoff games. That's 4. 4. He was left with 7. He gave us 4. If you really project, possibly, maybe, Richaun Holmes could be a starter in a playoff rotation, just like the Morris brothers eventually were. And I could maybe, if DeAnthony Melton reaches his ceiling, he could be a starter in a playoff team, much the same way like an Andre Roberson became a multi-year starter for the Thunder. So that's maybe 6. I mean, on the outside. So he inherited 7 playoff starters and the number 5 overall pick and 2 future firsts. He left us with 4 to 6 future playoff starters and no future first round picks and the same level of upcoming first round pick. So, Greg, try to tell me how he left this franchise.
Hey, prosecutor,
no playoff
prosecutor, you do not talk to the defense. I do.
All right. Jury. Don't listen to any of the crap, any of the gaslighting that defense attorney is going to give you in the next few minutes. But there is no way he left this franchise in better place than he started it.
Okay. We have now heard the opening argument from the prosecution on the trial of Ryan McDonough. Ryan McDonough's defense now has its opening arguments.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Your Honor.
I object.
I am
overruled.
Just kidding.
I am a simple man. I am not some big city lawyer like the prosecutor sitting across from me. I'm just a man that looks at facts and sees
we both
the reality.
Live in Phoenix, motherfucker.
Prosecutor, do not interrupt the defense attorney during his opening statement.
I live in Mesa. You live in Phoenix. I live in a small town. You live in a big city. It's just the way this is. Facts are facts, and as you can see, the prosecutor is already attempting to skew those facts in a way that just don't make sense. For me, I just look at things, and it's about the simplicity of facts. The facts will speak for themselves. The prosecutor is going to try to tell you that the only thing that matters here is the number of wins that happen in a season. Everything else is non-important because that's the only way that you judge that whether a team is better off than when they were taken over by a GM. And really what we're trying here in this portion of the case is who killed the Phoenix Suns. I mean, that's what we're trying to say here with this. And I will argue that there is another person that really should be charged for that and that put the wheels in motion that caused this entire last 10 years. The prosecutor tries to tell you that roster in 2012, 2013 that Ryan McDonough inherited was better than the roster that Ryan McDonough left when he was subsequently released of his duties as general manager. And I will prove throughout this, unlike the prosecutor, I'm not going to lay out my entire case in the opening argument. I'm going to tell you where I'm going, and then I'll lay out the case with evidence, because that's the way this should go. Evidence should make the case for you. And if you look at that 2013 roster, I'll prove that roster was significantly less set up for success than where Ryan McDonough left this franchise in later years. The facts are simple. Ryan McDonough inherited a roster that was set up for failure, that was not set up for the future, and was not set up for trying to win a championship in the long run. Part of the problem here is the mentality that the prosecutor is going to try to put on you is that accepting mediocrity and being an 8th seed in the playoffs perpetually is what this city should expect, and what this fan base and you, the jury, should expect from a team. But sometimes you have to take a step back before you take a step forward when you're trying to pursue a championship. And that is part of what went on here. That you had to take that subsequent step back to put your roster in a place to wind up winning in the long run. There was no star on the roster that Ryan McDonough inherited. There's arguably, potentially, 3 now on that roster that Ryan McDonough is given credit for bringing in. I will go through that, and I will show you how this roster that he left is significantly better than the one that he was given, and how people previous to him are the ones to blame for the charge against him now. My client is 100% innocent of this charge, and I will prove that throughout the remainder of this first trial. I hope that we can go through this together and keep it civil, and that you guys can look at, you the jury can look at the facts and the realities of things rather than the skewed logic and perception that the prosecutor is going to try to paint for you. But I will make sure that we get through this and make sense of what really happened here.
Defense, thank you. Prosecution, thank you. We do not have any follow-up questions yet from the jury. So we're going to go into the arguments and evidence-based portion of this trial. Again, we're going to start with the prosecution.
All right. Let's see. So for every piece of evidence, Greg gets to rebut it. Is that how we're going to go?
Nope. We talked about this prior to doing the show.
I know. So I'm trying to help everybody else understand what's happening here.
Sure.
We're not the only 3 people in the room.
See, the prosecutor can't even follow the rules. So, Your Honor, please set him straight.
Sure. Prosecutor, you have your chance to submit evidence, and then the defense has the chance to rebut that evidence or submit his own.
But not point by point.
It's not going to go back and forth. You will have your turn, and then the defense will have his turn.
Okay.
And then, of course, we do have follow-up questions, which can be submitted by the jury, a.k.a. the YouTube listeners right now.
Okay, Suns fans, judge and jury, thank you for giving me an opportunity to state my case in more detail than I did in the opening argument. My very first piece of evidence 1A, is the roster. I'm going to go back to that. The roster that Ryan McDonough inherited, that he so smugly and brazenly said was basically a bare cupboard, that his job was to upgrade the talent on the roster. Let's go through that roster, and let's talk about each of the players that ended up being better than he said that they were. First thing, he had Goran Dragic. Goran Dragic is the dude who scored 23 points in one quarter against the San Antonio Spurs to finally vanquish them in 2010. The prior regime had foolishly traded Dragic away. It was the owner, Robert Sarver, who brought Dragic back to the team, and he had played one season as their best young player. Dragic was only 25 at the time. And then coming into the 2013-14 season, Dragic was the equivalent, the best guy on their team. This is what happened after Ryan, but still, Ryan McDonough did not mention that Goran Dragic was a great cornerstone for the future of the franchise. Yet, Goran Dragic in his first season under McDonough with the roster that mostly built mostly 5 of the top 8 performers on that team he inherited. Ryan McDonough inherited from the prior regime. Goran Dragic was actually a second team. I think it was second or third team All-NBA that year, I'm pretty sure. And then he went on to become an All-Star eventually with another team after. We'll talk about that in a different charge against Ryan McDonough of how he soured that relationship. But he inherited Goran Dragic, a future All-Star. He had in his back pocket. He also had Channing Frye coming back from an injury where he sat out the entire 12-13 season with a heart issue, with an enlarged heart. He had Channing Frye coming back. Channing Frye went on to start in playoff games and play in playoff games. He had P.J. Tucker, who was the heart and soul of any team, who went on to play in the playoffs for the Houston Rockets. He had Markieff Morris, a young Markieff Morris, who at the time was still not destroying the team, that was a former first-round pick who was coming into his own. He ended up becoming one of the top 6 men of the year that first year that McDonough had him, and then they moved him into a starting lineup. He has since started playoff games for 2 different franchises. You've got Marcus Morris, his brother, who came in and was already on the team when Ryan McDonough took over. All these guys were already on the team when Ryan McDonough took over. And Marcus Morris also played in the playoffs for teams after leaving the Suns. That is 5 guys he inherited on his roster who were up and coming. Well, okay, so let's see. Goran Dragic, P.J. Tucker, and the Morris brothers were all seeing the best years of their careers going forward, not going backwards. And yet he somehow, when they did play in the playoffs, it wasn't for the Suns, for those guys. He also had Channing Frye on the tail end of his career, still in the late prime of his career. And he still had Marcin Gortat and Jared Dudley, who were also still playing several years. Gortat just barely retired. Channing Frye just barely retired 5 years later. And Jared Dudley is still going as a key athletic hands guy for the Los Angeles Lakers. These guys were all viable roster players. That's what he inherited. Plus, he had 2 future first-round picks in his pocket. He had a late first in 2013 itself, which he turned into the inimitable Archie Goodwin.
Objection. We're not supposed to be talking about specific roster
Fine.
moves.
I'm just talking about, I won't talk about transactions. I'm talking about what he inherited. He inherited a late first in 2013, and he inherited this pick that had the chance to was unprotected from the Lakers eventually, and could have been. That was the pick that everybody wanted. In fact, when the Suns came in, when Ryan McDonough came in, the Suns were ranked by ESPN as having one of the top 2 best draft treasure chests of future draft picks in the league. So that's what he came in. That's what he inherited. What he left was a team disarray. He left a team that nobody wanted that roster. He left a team that was a complete shambles, that only won 19 games.
This is you right now. You are submitting evidence. This is not your closing argument. I'm just warning you to keep that in mind.
This is he left the Suns worse off than when he showed up. Okay. He started with a team that had 7 future playoff starters over the next 5 years on his roster and 2 extra first-round picks. He left with no extra first-round picks and barely any guys who could play in a playoff team. You do have Devin Booker, who did eventually become an all-star, and he had Deandre Ayton, barely drafted, Mikal Bridges, barely drafted, and maybe T.J. Warren definitely is a playoff caliber guy, and maybe D'Anthony Melton and Richaun Holmes. Those are the guys he left behind as a worse team than he started with. And they never won after that first 2 seasons in which he got lucky. The last 4 seasons, he never won more than 24 games. So tell me why. I have no idea how you can possibly argue that they're better off.
You'll find
All
out.
right, prosecutor, thank you so much for your for submitting your evidence, which, just to sum it up for the jury, the roster had 7 future playoff players on it, left with no extra picks and barely any guys who could play in a playoff team. Defense, this is now your opportunity of the trial to submit your own pieces of evidence for the jury.
Thank you, Your Honor. The prosecution laid out an interesting argument, but I'd like to submit my first of numerous pieces of evidence. One, Mr. Lancifer Blanks.
Lancifer?
I believe that's his full name. I looked it up in the legal records because as a lawyer, I have that ability to do. So Lance Blanks, everybody, let me present to you the man who should be on trial here for the destruction of the Phoenix Suns. When Lance Blanks came in, he was acquiring a team that had just went to the Western Conference Finals. He had a roster that included 2 potential Hall of Famers at the time, Steve Nash and Grant Hill. He also had Jason Richardson, Goran Dragic, and Robin Lopez. The man then trades Goran Dragic and a first-round pick. Yeah, that's right. You heard that right. And a first-round pick that turned into Nikola Mirotic, a pretty good NBA player, for Aaron frickin' Brooks. Also, his legal name. Looked it up. Frickin' is his middle name. He then drafted Markieff Morris, and then traded for Marcus Morris. Markieff Morris. Marquise is their triplet that nobody talks about. Also, looked it up in the legal archives. And then he trades for Marcus Morris from the Houston Rockets and puts together the most toxic pairing in NBA history. The guys that actually wind up getting charged with assault. They beat up a guy for flirting with their mom at one point. They become the plague of the locker room during the Ryan McDonough era. And Lance Blanks and Lon Babby, who I do not blame for this. I put this all on Lancifer Blanks. They wind up signing Marcus and Markieff Morris to this bizarre choose-your-own-adventure contract.
Hey, transactions. No, come on, Judge.
This is not a Ryan McDonough transaction.
That's true. That's very true. You
Stop
cannot bring that up. Cannot bring up individual transactions. You know that defense.
Fine. And then Lance Blanks is the same guy that didn't draft a Kawhi Leonard because he sweat through his suit. We've got a Mensa member, and he drafted Kendall Marshall. It is Lance Blanks.
Again.
This is different. I'm not bringing up Ryan McDonough transactions. I am bringing up my case as to why Ryan McDonough is not to blame for devolving into the madness that the Phoenix Suns have come to. So Lance Blanks is the man who should be on trial here for what has been done to this Phoenix Suns team. The prosecutor, would like you to believe that the roster that Ryan McDonough inherited was this beautiful, wonderful, glowing team that had all this playoff potential that could have done everything you ever imagined. But I submit to you Exhibit 2, the full roster that Ryan McDonough inherited. And when you actually listen to this group, you're going to get sick to your stomach. Because Michael Beasley was the star on that roster. And it was said as much. He was the highest paid man on that roster. Michael Beasley, if you remember. Shannon Brown, another guy that is just spectacular. Goran Dragic, who, very nice, as Dave said, but was starting to be in the middle of his prime towards the end of it as well. Jared Dudley, great guy. We all love JD, but we're not talking about a guy that is a future star or a major part of a championship run. Deontay Garrett. Anybody remember that guy? Not many. Marcin Gortat, a personal favorite of mine. But again, we're not talking about an all-world big man that's going to change the game. Hamed Haddadi. Who's your Haddadi? Remember him? A flash in the pan in Suns history. The biggest impact he had was wearing the highest number ever on a Suns jersey in '98. Wesley Johnson, Kendall Marshall, The Morai, Jermaine O'Neal, Luis Scola, Sebastian Telfair, PJ Tucker, and Luke Zeller. There is almost as many people who have spent time in jail or being accused of doing something on this roster than have actually done anything in an NBA playoffs. So you cannot tell me that the cupboard was not at least pretty much bare when Ryan McDonough acquired this roster. So I submit to you Exhibit 3, which Dave also submitted, but I will resubmit. The roster that Ryan McDonough left the Phoenix Suns with when his tenure came to an end. And look, not everything's pretty on this. I'll be the first to admit that. This isn't a team that was going to win a title in the moment. But you look at it, and as I go through it, you will see building blocks that would project into the future much better than that original roster that he got. You have guys that you can look at and could see potential superstars and guys that will be a core part of a potential championship team in Phoenix when you look at this roster. So Ryan Anderson, yeah, we know about that. Trevor Ariza, he sucked, all right? I'll be honest. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Deandre Ayton, potential future game changer, all right? You're looking at a guy who could be the Hakeem of his generation. Dragan Bender, we know how that played out. I'm still on Bender Island, but not everybody else is. Devin Booker, undoubtedly the biggest star this franchise has had since Steve Nash and has the potential to be one of the all-time greats in Phoenix Suns history, and I don't think anybody, even the prosecution, can deny that. Mikal Bridges, who has a chance to be a 3-and-D guy that is a championship piece for this team. Isaiah Cannon, Tyson Chandler, Jamal Crawford, Troy Daniels, Jimmer Fredette, Rashawn Holmes, Joe Jackson, D'Anthony Melton was a great find, Elliot Kobo, and T.J. Warren.
Even draft Melton.
and T.J. Warren. So if you look at that, the argument here is he inherited an aging, decrepit, problematic locker room type of roster, and with guys, we're talking Sebastian Telfair, who's actually in prison now for having multiple weapons that he wasn't supposed to have to. The Morai, who were all sorts of problems, became the chaos that took down Jeff Hornacek's tenure and a team that was actually quite successful that first year. All sorts of problematic pieces on that roster, and he turned it into a roster that you look at and you see the future talent that could potentially bring a title. Because you look at it, those three guys in and of themselves, DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, there is no denying that those could be three major pieces on a championship team that happens here in Phoenix. Well, the prosecution is going to try to tell you that...
Defense, this is not your time to argue to the jury about what the prosecution is bringing. This is only a time to submit your evidence.
Well,
Has your evidence been submitted?
My final piece of evidence, Exhibit 4, is this, and it's quite simple and factual. The prosecution sucks. Those are my pieces of evidence.
I hereby, as the judge, take that out of consideration for all the jurors. We do have a juror that did submit a follow-up question, and this is for the prosecution. This is coming from Darth Voida what? Nope, it's actually just coming from Darth Voida. He says, what about all of the coaching changes that occurred under Ryan McDonough's watch? Under Ryan McDonough's watch, he ruined the culture, correct?
Objection. Those are transactions.
Yeah. Sure. So I'll just reply to Darth Voida. We have two more of these pieces of the trial to go. The next one is about transactions, which I'm going to kill him in, and the one after that is about culture. So we're not going to talk about what happened during. Today we're just talking about what he started with and what he ended with. Okay, so my closing statement is basically
prosecution.
Yes,
I'm the judge. I tell you when your opening statement begins.
My apologies, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I'd like to resubmit Exhibit 4 based on the evidence that we just saw from the prosecution.
Denied. Okay, closing statements. We're going to start with the prosecution.
Thank you, Your Honor. Jury, I'd like to submit to you that the prosecution is an ignorant slut. This is my closing statement.
I do not object.
Not evidence, so
I agree.
I can just say what I want to say.
I agree. The prosecution is an ignorant slut.
Did I say that?
Yes,
no,
you did.
I said
you must give the prosecutor his time without interruption.
The defense attorney is an ignorant slut. Okay, and possibly the prosecutor as well. All right. So my closing statement is I'm gonna respond to the pieces of evidence that were submitted by the defense because this is my opportunity to do that. First of all, you cannot make your entire argument that where Ryan McDonough is on trial, jury, the entire argument of Ryan McDonough being on trial cannot be about the other dude was worse. That's not what this country is all about. This country is all about putting the actual person on trial instead of spending the entire time trying to say somebody else was worse. That's not what this is about. So I just throw out the entire of it, just boom, out, exploded, done. No argument for Lance Blanks. You cannot make the Lance Blanks argument to distract from the Ryan McDonough trial. That's what we're in. Exhibit number 2, the 2012-13 roster. I already broke that down. He inherited 7 guys who went on to play in the playoffs in the next 5 years. None for the Suns. That's what he inherited. He left us with guys who couldn't play in the playoffs because obviously there were no playoffs during Ryan McDonough's tenure. There's an argument that he left us with an all-star, absolutely, but he didn't actually leave us with a current all-star. He left us with a future all-star that only blossomed after he was gone. There's also that 12-13 roster. As bad as that 12-13 roster is, they won 25 games. You know what that signifies? More wins than 4 of the 6 rosters that McDonough put together. As bad as that 25-win team was that he inherited, they had more wins than 4 of the 6 rosters that McDonough put together. I don't think I have to repeat that again. It's BS to argue that he left with more than he came with. He left with a worse team than he came with. That's regarding Exhibit 2. Exhibit 3, you're saying he left the Suns with a roster with potential. You know what? Every roster has potential. Yes, he did leave the Suns with a couple of higher ceiling guys than he started with, but the rest of the roster was complete crap. You tried to even mumble through the defense, tried to mumble through all the talent that was on the roster in 2018-19. Let's go through it again. Isaiah Canaan is your starting point guard. Coming into 18-19, Isaiah Canaan as your starting point guard. Elliot Kobo as your backup point guard. What else did you have? You had Jamal Crawford, 84 years old, coming out of retirement. Probably felt like he had retired 5 years prior. Came out of retirement. And you know what he became? Your lead guard off the bench. Come on. Let's be honest here. Ryan Anderson. Did he even make a 3 as the Sun? I think he made 1 3 all season. And it was for another team. And that was it. Dragan Bender was still on the roster at that time. Yet he was on his final season without another one coming. His 4th year couldn't even be guaranteed. He's been so bad.
Prosecutor, you have 2 minutes.
All right. George King, he drafted. Juwan Evans. Okay. Let's talk about guys he started the season with. Tyson Chandler. The dude had retired 3 years prior. We just didn't know it. I mean, look, he left the cupboard more bare than he started with. You cannot in any way argue that Ryan McDonough left the team better than we started with.
Prosecutor, thank you. Thank you. Defense. And we do have one jury follow-up question as well after the defense gets done with his closing statement.
And please submit more if you have them. No, I have to simply say again, like I said in the opening statement, that a man like the prosecutor is going to try to make you believe that this is all about wins and losses, and that's the only way you can judge this. And that's just simply not true. All right? He'll say that you cannot talk about the past because Ryan McDonough's on trial here, but it's simply, you have to find him completely guilty without a shred of doubt. And the doubt is Lancer for blanks. Hands down, what he left Ryan McDonough made it impossible to consider him the reason that there's been failure, that he left this team worse off than he inherited it. What this comes down to is, did you feel more comfortable with that roster that Lance Blanks, you, the jury, as fans, that Lance Blanks left this team with? Did you have faith that that was going to potentially contend for a title in the future? That they were going to get this Suns team and you, the jury, the fans, to the mountaintop, to be a true champion and be something that we've never had here in Phoenix? There is no way that you looked at that roster that Ryan McDonough inherited and had the utmost confidence that eventually that would turn into a title contending team. But when you look at the roster that Ryan McDonough subsequently left for James Jones, you see the building blocks of the next great Suns team. You see the opportunity to win a championship. You see a superstar in Devin Booker. And yes, I'm saying legally Devin Booker is a superstar now. You see Deandre Ayton, who has the potential to blossom into one of the greatest big men of his generation. In year 2, you saw that potential start to take hold and morph. You've seen Mikal Bridges prove that he could be a defensive stalwart in this league. Those are 3 pieces that Ryan McDonough brought in, and you cannot take that away from him. You can't simply go, well, there's the fringes around them, they weren't very good. The building blocks of the next great Suns team were left by Ryan McDonough, and you cannot deny that. His imprint on this team is indelible and will be here for years to come and maybe a decade to come, with a Larry O'Brien trophy potentially in the new Talking Stick Resort Arena due to the pieces that he helped bring into this franchise. Did he complete that picture? No. There is no doubt about it. When he left, they were not a title contending team, but he left more pieces for the next general manager to build that team than Lance Blanks left him, and there is no doubt about that whatsoever. Lance Blanks came in with Hall of Fame talent and left with a poo-poo platter of dysfunction and just ridiculousness on the roster. Ryan McDonough left with 3 potential all-stars and superstars that would be part of a championship team on the roster. If you look at this as simply wins and losses, yes, it's an argument that you can make and easily make, but quite frankly, it's lazy and does not surprise me that the prosecution brought that weak sauce to the table. Dikembe Mutombo would say, not in my house. You do not do that. It is ridiculous and weak. You have to look at the totality of the roster, the confidence you have in the pieces that are left, and the pieces that will be here for years to come to make a future potential contending team. Dave will, the prosecutor will tell you, 7 guys were from that roster were playoff players. Great. None of them were particularly great on those teams. They were all pieces around stars. They were fringe pieces that were
Defense,
nice.
you have 1 minute.
Nice pieces that fit in, right? They were not the guys that brought you a championship. If you look at it, if the Suns are going to win a championship in the next 5 to 10 years, the pieces that will lead them to that were pieces Ryan McDonough brought in. Devin Booker, Deandre Ayton, Mikal Bridges. I rest my case.
Thank you, defense. Thank you, prosecutor. We do have 2 questions from the jury. These are both going over to the defense. You have 30 seconds to answer each question. The first jury question is...
with Ryan McDonough, and there's nothing wrong with that when you're defending a man, because I understand his character, I understand the inner workings and what truly happened. I have insight that a person like the prosecutor would never understand about the way this happened. And I think that is a benefit, not a downfall of my defense.
Okay, the second juror question, this is coming from Pat. He says, don't you think that the roster should be much better now with all the assets he got from the tanking?
Was that to the defense?
Yep. 30 seconds.
Yes, and I would argue that it is significantly better. You look at the top 3 of the roster he inherited: Goran Dragic, Markieff Morris, Michael Beasley. You look at the 3 he left with: Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, Mikal Bridges. If you would take those other 3, I have a padded room welcome for you to use.
Okay, so now we do need the jurors to vote on who won the first
Tim,
part.
there was, Your Honor, There's one more question in the comments for the defense.
I saw that. I decided not to do that question because it was submitted so late into the trial itself.
Okay.
For the jurors that are watching, we do need your vote on whether or not the defense or the prosecution won this phase, not the entire trial, but this phase of it. So in the chat, type in defense or prosecution. My turn to weigh in, and this is in regards to a statement that the prosecutor made earlier, claiming that the defense could not bring in Lance Blanks because Lance Blanks was not on trial. I object to that. That is incredibly common in all the TV trials I've ever watched, where the defense oftentimes brings in another suspect of who could have actually committed the crime.
Can I rebut this?
No.
Yes.
Actually,
you can respond.
Your
Yes,
Honor,
because
I
can respond to that. Okay. Even if you do include Lance Blanks, he left more on the cupboard than Ryan McDonough did because he left 7 playoff caliber starters on his roster and 2 extra first round picks coming. Even if you can include Lance Blanks.
Wow.
He left more than Ryan McDonough did. And he had fewer years to do it in.
I would like to respond. I think there is no surprise here that the prosecutor is wearing a jacket that he also wore in a Joker costume because his reasoning is completely comical. And
I should have put back on the Joker makeup too for this.
Can we also, Your Honor, let the people, the jury voting, remind them that this is a referendum on whether Ryan McDonough left this team in a worse spot than where he inherited it, and not anything additional.
I do actually take that entire argument out because we already brought it up earlier in the episode, and I do feel like you are now just trying to reiterate your case after your closing statement.
No, that is actually the charge against him. I was just simply asking.
You cannot resubmit that. No.
Okay.
I say no.
But by the way, you should have
powers invested in me.
You should have put the Joker prosecutorial makeup back on, Dave. You should have.
And going to the jury for the first part of our 3-part series on the trial of Ryan McDonough, it does look like unanimous decision. Everybody believes that the defense didn't win this episode, even if they don't agree. And that is not an indication of whether or not they will vote to convict Ryan McDonough or not. That being said,
it's not unanimous. I got a vote.
You got one, and Dave is in the prosecutor is in the chat himself, trying to sway the jury.
We'll take that out. So thank you everybody so much for joining. Thank you so much to the defense.
You can't take out MT's vote.
You're right. No, it was not unanimous, but it was still overwhelming to the defense. Sorry, prosecution. Although on the next episode, you do get to bring up individual transactions, which might be slightly more favorable to your argument.
I would like to thank the jury for their service and admit that I am likely going to get my ass handed to me in the next 2 phases of this trial. So thank you for giving me the opening win here. Thank you.
This is a microcosm of the U.S. entirely. You can sway somebody just by being persuasive. I had all the evidence in my favor.
We are also going to remit that from the episode as well. So join us live next Saturday. This is at 7 o'clock Arizona time. If you want to get in and submit your questions to the prosecution or the defense, or vote on who won that specific episode or that specific phase of the trial, I should say, of Ryan McDonough. My name is Tim Tompkins for Dave King and Greg Esposito. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really do appreciate you, and we will be back next Saturday, 7 o'clock Arizona time.
Ahoy, hoy.